Here in the Northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks where kindred souls gather together to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as the February Room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for composite development fly rods and accessories. 40 years of Kiwi ingenuity and graphite technology, now available at cd-fishing.us or your local CD USA dealer. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And remember to go fishing. Here's your host, the Carnops, and this is the February Room.
The term first descent is often reserved for the kayaking, skiing, snowboarding crowd to credit the first brave soul willing to attempt a harrowing waterfall or a skinny couloir. But the world of fly fishing adventure travel comes with an inherent pucker factor as well, and somebody's got to go first. My guest today certainly has a number of first descents beneath his belt, and we're thrilled that he has agreed to join us on the show. Will Blair, welcome to the February Room.
Hi, Justin. It's great to be here. It's been a long time, man. It's good to talk to you.
You too, man. Really good to catch up. Asking a person like you if you have any fly fishing adventure stories is kind of like asking a ranch hand if he has any calluses. So please fire away.
Yeah, I actually am working on a book about Kamchatka and this, and I have a lot of stories going right now. But, with the intro of a first descent, I have two first descent stories, maybe three different ones where they were always, they're always just on the edge of disaster the entire time. We went on a first descent down a river called the Rosochna in 2007. I did it with three biologists. And at the end of that week, my Russian partner was having a competition with a guy who's long gone, Kostya Maslov, from the area about the upper Yalovka and the tributary drainages. Just kind of, I don't know what was exactly going on with them, but we did this first descent down the Rosochna, and then my partner wanted me to go, oh, see, now look at this. That's a different year. That's 2003. I'm getting my years messed up and my stories messed up. So in 2007, 3 years after that story would have been, I do a first descent. We're going to go down a river called the Shishay. And the Shishay runs into the Yalovka River. And the Shishay is big. It probably runs where we put in 2,000 CFS. And it gets significantly bigger. So we fly up there. It as well is inside of Kura missile testing zone. So we have to have clearance and everything. And we drop in, and as we drop in a big MI8, I have two doctors, and two biologists with me that are from California, Roger Bloom, and I can't remember his buddy's name. And so we land on the Shishay on this big bar. Victor, my partner, says, go catch some Dolly Varden for the pilots. And so I go around the corner and start reefing in Dolly Varden as fast as I can off the riffles. And for some reason, they took off without getting their fish. But as they take off, the one dock is fighting a big rainbow under the prop wash. And it's the first fish of his trip on Kamchatka, and it's a 27-inch rainbow on a mouse. It's huge.
So sorry. So you've flown in with a boat?
We've flown with rafts. So we have
raft. Okay. With the motor.
That's an integral part of the story. We have two rafts. And right, two rafts.
Like a Zodiac style boat with a motor on it? Or?
They're big rafts, regular 18, 20-foot pontoon rafts with frames on them. They're big. They're normal, rafts you'd see everywhere.
Okay.
But we have two staff members, Russian guys, Vanya and Sasha, me, and then four guests. So there's 7 people. And so we jump into rafts and start heading down the river. The thing about the Shishay is it's kind of glacial and it had some color to it. In the first back channel that we stopped, the guys stayed out on the main channel. The 4 guys are all super good fishermen. And I went and jumped in a back channel way in the back. And it's one of the few times on Kamchatka I landed a 30-inch trout and didn't have anyone around. On the back channel, on the mouse, this whole back channel was just loaded with great big rainbows. And I wailed on them all the way down the back channel, jump back out, get out to those guys. So we head down the river and everything's, pretty kosher. One of the docks, Dolly Baba, he's a wild man, general surgeon from Idaho. He would take off and he was hard to control. And at the end of the day, we had a hard time. Boy, we had a hard time finding him. He's off on these back channels, right? And can't find him. And I actually had, this is before my knee replacement, just a few years before I had my total knee replacement. And my knee is really bad. I chasing him off in the back channels through the tundra and the grass humps, the nightmare. At the end of the day, we're all exhausted. We park all the boats on a gravel bar, and Sasha and Vanya's cooking, Sasha's taking care of everything. We're setting the tents up. Everything's great. We're drinking beer, catching lots of fish. It's going to be a great trip, right? Next morning, I wake up, and I'll never forget, I'm in this tent, and I look up above me, and there's Vanya looking down at me. I mean, face to face almost. And Vanya speaks no English, barely, or very little. And he looks at me and he goes, "Will, no boat."
Oh.
I'm like, what are you talking about? No. Will, no boat. I jump up, and I don't know who would be guilty. It might have been me, might have been them. I'm not going to point fingers. I don't remember. And we were all kind of cranked up at the time. When those glacial rivers, it was a super hot day, and during the night, the water came up a few inches from the sunshine the day before. And away floated our boat, one of our rafts, untied, unanchored, and in the middle of nowhere. With 7 guys.
So do you still have one boat now?
Yeah, one boat. But the other boat with all the unstrung fly rods, so like $10,000 in fly rods, and the beer is somewhere downriver.
Oh dear, gone. Oh no.
It's a big problem, both those things. And so all 7 of us load everything up on this raft, and I'm the only one who has any real experience rowing. So, but I also have a really bad knee. It's killing me. And the 7 guys, all our gear, on a river we don't know anything about. Nothing. Haven't been down it. Haven't fished it.
No map, no info, no beta, nothing. Just a blind run.
And this is 2007, so I wasn't
in the middle of the Russian wilderness.
I had a GPS with a topo of Kamchatka on it, and which probably saved our lives, because one of the things that happens on all those rivers, since it's real mountainous, there'll be a point where it drops into the valley, and oftentimes when it drops into the valley, it'll start blowing through the trees. All of them do. And you don't want to be in a super heavy boat going through the trees in a giant river with overloaded. And so we went probably 5 or 6 miles looking for that raft, no sign of it. And I mean, just the river's getting faster, and I know at some point it's going to hit the trees and we're going to have big problems. So we get to a huge run, riffle, super fast water, and I don't know how close we are to where it's going to get into the sweepers and the trees. So we pull over to the side, and I call Victor, my partner, on the satellite phone. And I explain the situation to him. And he says, okay. And about an hour later or 2, we get everything all packed up, pull off to the side, and about an hour later or two, in comes the helicopter. Thank God, right? And so we throw everything on the helicopter and start flying down the river on the deck looking for the raft. And maybe a mile below where we stopped, the river just braids into the trees with huge sweepers and just nightmare.
Just nasty.
Yeah, you're not going to, you can probably deal with it if you got two, both rafts, but not. So there's a raft hung up in the very first corner of sweepers. Looks pretty good. We land, and as we're landing, one of the things that's true about the Shishay, because it's inside of Kerr missile testing zone, it doesn't get hunted very hard. So the brown bears in that area are way less spooky. So we're basically landing the helicopter over the top of this brown bear laying on the carcass of another brown bear.
Jesus.
And it just kind of gets up and wanders off. It didn't even run. And we jump out and have chainsaws and chainsaw the thing out and grab the raft and decide that we weren't going to finish the trip out on the Shishay, and went down to the Levia, which I've fished a number of times, and actually is one of my favorite rivers, and floated it, and it's crystal clear and full of giant rainbows. But it wasn't an exploratory, because I had floated it prior to this and knew it. And so it wasn't an initial descent, but that initial descent was cut short.
So you were able to salvage the boat and the gear and everything and get everything out of there?
Everything back, no problem.
Jeez, man, what luck. God.
I'd rather be lucky than good, man. So there's so many crazy stories, but the satellite phone saved, and that GPS could have saved our lives, because that place was super, super dangerous looking.
Oh, I can't imagine, man. I mean, does some shit go down on almost every adventure out there? I had these guys last year. We were floating Rock Creek during the salmon fly hatch. I was guiding them, and they had been to Russia a couple of times, and they were telling me this story about being on this big boat, and they took a giant personnel carrier vehicle or something, which I'm sure you're familiar with, into some remote river and launched a jet boat, and they were all on this boat, and they came around a corner, and this giant bear charged the boat and was mere feet away from grabbing the guy in my boat off the back of the boat. And the dog jumped out and stopped the bear and startled him, and it was just harrowing story. And they're like, oh yeah, shit like that happens all the time in Kamchatka.
Here's the deal. I would say stuff happens all the time, but not bear stuff. And bear stuff is really kind of rare, just because of the way we handle the bears on our programs. We aren't going, so on the Ozranaya, where we have 8 people a week with jet boats, we have at least 2 or 3 bear dogs at all times. There's guns in camp. And I mean, I'm looking at my office at a bear tooth that was from one shot in 213 on that program, because it wouldn't go away. I mean, we give them every opportunity to not get killed. And I mean, we shoot them with bird shot. We throw firecrackers at them. We do, bottle rockets. We do everything we can not to kill them. But sometimes they
insist.
Yeah, the vast majority of Kamchatka, though, it's hunted, and honestly, it's far more like the Upper Nushagak, where I worked a whole season and never saw a bear. I mean, you can go a long time in Kamchatka and not see a bear if you're loud and you make lots of noise. So I've been on Kamchatka now for 20 some years, 177 weeks total time, and I've never carried a gun. I've never carried bear spray. I've been charged a couple times, been almost eaten once, but those were all my fault. They were all when I was alone. They were always when I was being quiet. There was some ulterior motive or mistake that I made. They were all those times there were mistakes I made, not anything to do with the bears. I actually am kind of a fan of the bears. They're reasonably benign, especially since they've been hunted. They know what the working end of a gun is. A lot of them. So I like to poo-poo the bear talk too much about Kamchatka because I think it's overblown, but it's possible. You can deal with a grumpy bear. I have one of our guides caught one in the middle of the river swimming, and it stood up and took a swipe at him, but it was 10 feet away, right? And so I always take a lot of the stories that I hear about Kamchatka with a grain of salt, because I have been personally involved and then heard them told later, reasonably embellished.
Right, right. And yeah, I'm sure part of it too is it's such a wild and woolly place that those stories just kind of become lore. You're probably more or as likely to get killed or attacked by a bear in Montana. I don't
Probably.
know. I don't know if you heard, but there was a gal that got drug out of her tent and killed on the Blackfoot a couple months ago. A guide in Yellowstone died this summer. A guy just got mauled over in Ennis. So yeah, I mean, bear encounters in Montana are becoming fairly commonplace.
Well, and I think that's a slightly different animal than what we deal with in Kamchatka. I mean, the thing happens, the bears will be kind of a nuisance. One time in 2000, speaking of another initial descent, in 2014, I drove from our jet boat lodge on the Ozreniah all the way to the mouth. It took us 4.5 hours by jet boat. And there's a commercial fishing crew at the mouth. And when we got there, I asked the guy, I said, can we walk up and down the beach? And this is in July. Really, the salmon are just starting. He's like, no, it's not safe. Those bears are patrolling the beach in July. But as those salmon come in, those bears follow those fish up the river. They'll be a little bit troublesome if they get there before the salmon for a week or so, or a few days. But boy, as soon as those salmon show up, they fish, and then they become very nocturnal. And you'll see them first thing in the morning, and maybe if you're running in or you're hanging out in front of the lodge at night, they'll come out. And they're very predictable in so much that they go to the salmon, and then August comes around and they go to the blueberry fields. We do fish one little tributary, which is a hike-in called Lamutskaya on the Ozreniah, and that can be very hairy a little bit. But when we go in there, the guys have guns and generally take a dog with them. Sometimes we don't take a dog. I mean, we had a dog go in there one time back in 2007 with our American guide, and some rich Russian guy was flying around, saw our big dog Bucks running through the tundra, landed the helicopter and shot the dog.
God, thinking it was a
looked
wolf?
like a wolf from the air.
What kind of dogs are these? Are they Karelian bear dogs or?
They're Kamchatka Lycas. They're Kamchatka bear dogs. They look a lot like huskies, and the Russians in Kamchatka will call them huskies. But to be correct, they are Kamchatka Lycas. They are a distinct breed on Kamchatka, and they run right up to brown bears, 1,000-pound brown bear, and bite it right on the ass.
That's insane.
They're absolutely fearless. But they're great dogs. I mean, I've had such wonderful experiences with the dogs of Kamchatka. Chuk died a few years ago now. At 15 was definitely my favorite dog. I knew him his whole life. He worked at the Ozreniah every summer, with just this, but he was prettier than normal. Brown, tan, black, white. He was a spectacular animal, about 80 pounds, 90 pounds, big for a Lyca, very stocky. He would, I don't know how many times at the Ozreniah, we would watch him fight with the bears from 50 feet away.
Wow.
Hair flying, the bear's hair.
Jesus, that's crazy.
Yeah, man, just absolutely ferocious, and run him off and get rid of those bears. And Chuk was so good. He was the best best bear dog of all time, as far as I'm concerned. And at 15 years of age, a bear snuck up on him at the spring bear hunting camp early in the morning when Chook was asleep. He was almost deaf, and killed him.
Well, better than him dying of cancer.
Yeah, it was a perfect way for Chook to go. I mean, we all were upset about it, but I mean, that was the perfect end for that ferocious bear dog. I love that dog.
And is that Leica, like the optics company? Is it spelled Leica?
Oh, I've seen it spelled a bunch of different ways. Lika is the way I see it, or Lyka. And
Okay.
you can't find much information on them outside of Kamchatka and outside of the Russian language. But when you're on Kamchatka, they're very proud that they are a distinct breed, and will you get to watch them work and you'll know, man. I don't know of any other dogs. There's some on my Facebook page. There's video of our dog's drone video I took of them biting the bear on the butt while they're chasing it out of camp. 3 of our dogs.
Oh, cool. I'm going to check that out.
You know, and Kamchatka has a lot of bears for the one reason that I really care about it the most. There's a ton of fish there. And, you know, I don't think people realize that it gets 1/3 of the world's Pacific salmon spawn on Kamchatka. Man, it's a quarter to a third. I've heard different things, but it's hundreds of millions of salmon every year. And like 2019, the Ozernaya had a huge pink run. There had to be 10 million pinks in the river. And boy, at the end of the season, those rainbows were the biggest trout I've ever seen in a river. As far as length to girth proportions, because all they had to do was sit on the bottom and just open their mouth and eggs would flow in. And, you know, and that is the thing about Kamchatka. The rivers are still in pristine condition for the most part and still produce huge natural reproduction of all the species of salmon, including cherry salmon on the West Coast, which we don't have here. But like the Ozernaya has a huge run of kings, big run of chums, 2 runs of chums actually, July and then a fall run. And most of the rivers of Kamchatka will mirror this same thing. Big run of pinks every other year. Kamchatka has pink runs every year. It just switches coasts. So the Sea of Okhotsk side will have it on one year, and then next year it'll be the Bering Sea side. And so, and some of the other interesting things, it has 29 active volcanoes, and active volcanoes are really good for reproduction of fish, from what I read, because they give a lot of nutrients to the system and pH balance. So, you know, it really produces a ton of trout. I personally tell guys all the time, don't go to Kamchatka to salmon fish, man. No reason. If you run into some silvers or kings that are chrome and good, great, get after it. But, you know, Alaska is so set up for, you know, salmon fishing. There's so many lodges and tidewater and real good access, whereas Kamchatka, there isn't real good access to tidewater almost anywhere. Most of the programs are farther upriver. So, but at the same time, the rainbows are the real show on the peninsula.
Right.
And, you know, there's so much about Kamchatka that people don't know. Like, people still don't know that it has incredible dry fly fishing with hatches in every single river.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that when we first met a long time ago, and you made that point, that's, you know, very distinctive from Alaska fishing, whereas it's a bead game primarily. Now there's mousing in Alaska and streamer fishing and everything, but yeah, you had laid it out to me that there's hatches and you can dry fly fish to these massive rainbows.
Well, in 21 years of guiding on Kamchatka, I've never tied a bead on a guest rod as an indicator bead system. I've slid them on in front of the streamers to make them egg-sucking leeches and things, but not one time have I bead fished. One of the funniest times I was with some guys, and they fish Kulik a lot of times in Alaska, which is pretty solid bead fishing most of the season. certainly August and September. And we were on the 2-yard, our float trip river, in an area where there's a huge, maybe couple mile long king red, where there's just tons of kings will be in there, and they make those giant divots everywhere, and the rainbows love them. And then one guy says to me, I think we'll do better with beads. And I said, go ahead, try them, man. And he puts on a bead rig, and he can't dip that thing in the water 6 inches and not have a 5-inch dolly, 3-inch salmon smolt, or an 8-inch rainbow. But nothing big. Nothing at all big. And after about half an hour, he had caught one 15-inch rainbow. And I said, man, they want meat. These are big predators. Put on a big streamer. And so we put on a big streamer, and you start whacking them again. The bead there's too many small fish in the river to bead. And all of them. There's no point to it. You spend all day long unhooking, salmon.
Right. And I mean, why would you bead fish if you can do something different?
Well, so for instance, in 2014, I started our program called Rainbows from Above off a 2-year base lodge. And me and 4 anglers and another guide fly out in an MI2 every day, little helicopter every day, and fish all these creeks all over the upper northern central part of Kamchatka. And there's 3 or 4 of them that we land on that are full-blown spring creeks. I mean, look like the most beautiful spring creek you've ever seen, and also get spawning salmon in them. And the numbers of rainbows, people wouldn't believe me. There's one we found in 2019 I call the Ali as my code name because I think it's the greatest of all time. I mean, it's not bragging. I mean, it's so full of giant rainbows. But we get there, we land, and you can see there's in all the rivers of Kamchatka, they have lots of trout in them. They tend to have quite a bit of buttercup, which is a plant species on the bottom that only grows in muddy, kind of soft 2.5 mile an hour areas. So we land on this spring creek. It's all buttercup. There's, where there's gravel and everything as well. It's beautiful. And we get out, and I unfortunately that day had drawn the straw of taking the 2 75-year-old guys. Well, my co-guide, Yegor, gets the 2 45-year-old guys who can really fish. Right? And by the time, I mean, we can see rainbows scattering from the air as we land. Big ones, lots of them, everywhere. And then we land, and I go upriver with the older guys, and one of them says, "Can I try my mouse? I tied this special mouse." I'm like, "Okay, what is it?" And it's a chartreuse cork bobber that he has coated in glue and pommered rabbit over.
Chartreuse.
Yeah, it's got like this chartreuse tint under it with I said, go ahead, throw it out there. And I mean, every cast, these fish are just pulling it under. They can't hardly get it down, right? But we caught a whole bunch of them until they ripped all the hair off of that cork bobber and they wouldn't eat it anymore. In the meantime, these young guys down the way are wailing on them. We catch up with them. And they're on this big corner catching trout, and they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna jump on and go across. We fished here a long time. There's a bunch more." And I'm like, "Okay." It's a pretty good sized pool, flat, Spring Creek, and the guys are like, "Yeah, can we try dry flats?" I'm like, "Yeah, you put them on." And you put on a big parachute Adams, throw it out there, and it's doubles, one right after the other. And it's not little fish are all over 20 inches up to about 26, 27 that day.
Damn.
And I mean, conservatively, we hooked 500 rainbows that day.
God.
Because even my guy, Yegor, caught 21 while we were sitting there watching him at lunch. and they're big. And we're using 7
That's
weights and
insane.
15-pound tippet, all on a mouse, 15-pound tippet. So you don't, it's not like you allow them to run way into your backing. I have my reel cranked down. I can hardly hold on to it. And you got big hook in them. And so we fight them fast and get them going and, try and really mortality as low as possible. The biggest problem with the Kamchatka trout is they're so aggressive. They impale themselves on things.
So these Kamchatka trout are they like genetically unique to Kamchatka? Are they similar to wild Alaska rainbows, or how much do we know? I guess about the history of them, their genetics.
Okay, so that Spring Creek that I'm talking about flows into a river called the T-Gill, and the T-Gill is what the Russian biologists call the birthplace of rainbow trout, steelhead, and salmon. It's a
Really?
huge system on the west coast of Kamchatka. Huge, massive system on the west coast. And it has one little village down at the mouth. Lots of rivers that run into it that are great. The fly shop fishes, the Sedanka is a famous one that's also a T-Gill River drainage. The Prizhnikova is another one they fish that's a T-Gill River drainage. Some of their exploratory trips they do are on T-Gill River drainages. It's a huge system. And so the Russian biologists would tell you that they've done a lot of work, man. Those guys, they have every river. They know what's in them genetically. I don't know if they have a real, because of the way we operate, we're so concerned about sport fishery. So we know exactly how, within reason, how many trout are in a particular system. That's not something that's of interest to them so much in the past. Maybe it is now, and I could be speaking out of turn, but I do know, like Igor Shatila worked for us a couple years on the Ozernaya, and the numbers of trout that we caught are astounding. I can't even remember the statistics, but it's just insane numbers of trout, right? But they say this is an American trout, and this is a Kamchatka trout. And there is a slight difference. And there are different genetics in different rivers that I see. Like the rainbows in the Rasoshna River that we fly out to. It's a real rocky, kind of fast, rather unpleasant river to wade. But the rainbows in it are giant footballs that are chrome and look almost like steelhead, and will rip you a new one every time you catch one. But just go over the hill to the next river north of there, the Kunhilik, which is a slow, brady kind of woody, log jammy one. We don't fish all that often. Those rainbows will be kind of dark, look more like a cutthroat with bigger spots, and have cut slashes under their gills, and look significantly different than the ones right over the hill from them.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I try and pay attention to what they look like in each system, and they definitely have their own. But some rivers, like the Ozernaya, is huge, and we see both what the Russians call American rainbows and what they call Kamchatka rainbows, which looks more like a cutthroat. And somehow they may have not diverged that far from cutthroat. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but for sure there are more than one genetic strain on Kamchatka, and they're totally native, 100%.
Interesting. That's awesome. Some time ago, I still have the hat that you gave me, but you were involved with the Kamchatka Steelhead project, correct?
Well, so I guided one season on Kamchatka Steelhead Project, 1998. I'm looking at a triple picture on my office wall of me, Scott Howell, and Ryan Lampers on the Sopochanaya in 1998.
Can you tell me about that? And just about steelhead a little bit in Kamchatka in general.
So they're only on the west coast, on the Sea of Okhotsk side. And biologists say they go from Ust-Bolsheretsk, which is about straight across from Petropavlovsk, 2/3 of the way down the peninsula on the west coast, all the way up to Cape Utolik, which is a big cape that hangs off the west coast. So there was a book written many years ago, and I can't remember her name, Marina something, and it was called The Steelhead of Kamchatka, Salmon's Trout Steelhead of Kamchatka, and they put in the 70s, they put the Kamchatka Steelhead book on the Red Book, which is basically the Russians' ESA, Endangered Species Act. And that means that you're not allowed to molest them in any way, or mess with them, or fish for them, or eat them, or anything. They're supposed to be off limits. So the Wild Salmon Center, along with Pete Soverall and the guys from Moscow State University, got together in the early 90s and said, hey, maybe we can cook up a way that we can sponsor biological research through sport fishermen. And they still have the program up on Cape Utolik, the Snalovayam, the Kwachna, the Utolik River. I heard somewhere they're going to fish not the Icha, a different one. Anyway, the Sopochanaya that we fished on, no American, as far as I know, has fished it since 1998.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. That was a year, now that he's passed away, and Tony Sarp, the owner of Katmai Lodge, had cooked up that deal through Wild Salmon Center and Pete's Overall, and they ran that program 96, 7, and 8. And I somehow, because of personnel quitting, became the manager in 98 of Tony's program over there, but I was nothing. I was just like a name he put on me so he could put the heat on me instead of himself. And he had a big battle. He had a big battle with the Russians, the outfitter, about money. And I went into a meeting in Petropavlovsk with Andrei Sitsko, who was the outfitter's representative of Yana Kutz. And I can't remember the biologist who was working for Wild Salmon Center. And Andre hands me the contract that Tony has sent to him to sign, and he says, read clause 15. I'm like, I wish I had a copy of this because it was so wild. And I read it, and it says, for any complaint voiced by a client concerning food, lodging, transportation, guiding, Jan and Kutz International will reimburse Katmai Lodge Limited $1,000 per complaint. I read that and I tossed it back on Andre's desk. I said, I guess we're not steelhead fishing. He goes, this guy must think we're idiots, right?
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, he must. He thinks everyone's an idiot. And so what went down that then we had two groups show up at the Japanova where Ryan and Monty Ward and I were all guiding for trout, who were supposed to go to the Sopochanaya steelhead fishing. And they got off the helicopter and like, what am I doing here? I said, you tell me. Well, the story that Tony Sarp was telling people around the planet was that there was a typhoon and that the camp had been washed out into the Sea of Okhotsk, some of it, and that they weren't sure where Scott was. And that's why they weren't running those 2 weeks. And I was like, and I'm like, well, I haven't talked to Tony in 2.5 months, so I have no idea, because this is before sat phones were, handy. So that's when we went and explored the Kolpakova, which I had a camp on for 3 years after that. Because what ended up happening at the end of that season is Anatoly Kovalenkov, who I really like, rest his soul, and Andrei Konovalov, who is an interpreter, bring me out by the helicopter. Andre's leaving for the season or going into town. It's the end of the season. I'm leaving shortly thereafter. He says, tell your boss never to come to Kamchatka, because we caught him every single week this year stealing one client's money. So what Tony Sarp was doing was he was telling people, he was telling the Russians, this guy is a group leader, a host. It's a comp trip. I didn't charge him. And then the Russians went up and would ask that comp trip, what'd you pay for your trip? Oh, it's $7,000, just like everybody else. What do you mean? Oh, nothing. They caught him all summer long
Wow.
for 10 groups. And so that was when I left Katmai Lodge's employee and started Kamchatka Expeditions.
Gotcha. And do you know what's the present state of steelhead in Kamchatka? Are they as imperiled as they are out here?
I don't know that they're imperiled because it's such a crazy, crazy far place to go. And so when we do end up going up to the Sobochnaya that year, we land the helicopter and I jump off and I'm like steelhead crazy, right? I grew up
Right.
in Michigan, boondogging and bouncing for steelhead. And I'm just out of my mind. I fished some on the West Coast. I'm just ready. And I said, Scott, how you doing? And he says, well, I kind of am going slow now because I'm using the bamboo spay my dad made me. And, I think I landed like 15 yesterday or 12, something like that.
Jeez.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? We go out, we store our gear. And as we go over the first little depression, which is a king salmon red, Scott says, look over the side when I drive over that. And I look over and there's just silver bars shooting out. We hooked 8 in less than an hour. Ryan landed the only one. It was like an 18-pound chrome dime bright hen. And we didn't have guests. The guy from Colorado had canceled his week. And we landed 41 steelhead the next day. It was wild. I mean, they were coming over the bars like sockeyes. So no one's fishing there as far as I know. The problem with the steelhead of Kamchatka is they're the last big chrome fish of the year, and they're very attractive to the poachers. And so they can be accessed by poachers, and it's hard to say what kind, like the Sobochnaya, it's hard to say what kind of shape that run is in right now. I know that the rivers that the Wild Salmon Center fishes up on Cape Utolik are going to be in good shape because there's people there all the time, and they patrol it, and they know. But pretty much in Russia, if you don't have people there watching out for the bad guys, there's going to be bad guys there because it's money. And it's an interesting thing, though, because Kamchatka is definitely less populated than it was when I first went there. When I first went there, there was almost 500,000 people on the peninsula. Now there's just over 200,000.
Huh. Why is that?
Oh, because it's hard to make money. It's the most expensive place outside of Moscow for food and stuff in Russia. It's not expensive. It's not cheap living. It's kind of, the city of Petropavlovsk is, not great. It's in the most pretty setting of maybe any major city I've ever seen, but it was built by the Soviets. It's still kind of a dirty Soviet city.
Gotcha. So, kind of steering away from Kamchatka for a minute. You're now a partner in a lodge in the Bahamas in the remote Jamento Keys, correct? Called Lost Key Lodge.
Yeah, wow. Is that a stroke of fishing luck? I'll tell you. Um, yeah, I just got super, super, super lucky to be involved with that. Um, I actually was asking. This lodge was built back in 207 and 208, ran 208 and part of 209, and as Ragged Island Bonefish Lodge. The guys at Angling Destinations were involved up in Sheridan. One of the partners was really the guy involved, but he left. He quit the partnership and kind of flew the coop and left the Bahamian guy high and dry and a little bit burned. So for FICO Wallace, my partner down there, he runs Bahama Power and Light for the island. He's a super talented guy. I mean, just really, really talented carpenter. He can do electrician. I don't think there's anything he can't do. He's a really good boat mechanic too, engine mechanic. And So he has this little lodge there, and then a local neighbor here in in Boulder said, "Hey, Feichel's interested. His kids are older now. He's wondering if you can, if you would be interested in, I know you do a lot of booking yourself for Kamchatka. What about going down there and checking it out?" And so we went down. It was a wild adventure. We rode the mail boat from Nassau to Ragged Island for 3.5 days. That was one of the coolest adventures I've had. It was just awesome. But we also get there, run out from the harbor, around the corner, pull up, and there's two 10-plus pound bonefish swim by, and 10 minutes later he lands a 10-pounder.
Wow.
Not an 8-pounder, not a 9-pounder, not a 9 3/4 pounder, a 10-plus pound bonefish, a real legit double digit. And I was like, wow. So then we had bad weather, some, problems. Obviously, we saw a bunch of permit and didn't catch any, saw all kinds of stuff, talked to all the locals. It seemed pretty good. So I went and took a group of young guys down there and made a movie for Fly Fishing Film Tour, and that ran in 2020, but in 2019, in the spring of 2019, in May, it's funny what you think, Anyway, we had really good bone fishing. We caught a big permit, saw some others, but we didn't really have a good boat. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we did. They did. They knew way more than me, actually. Rex Messing, Elliot, and Hall, and these guys were just super salty, good young guys. I mean, it really, I'll tell you, they're all in their mid to late 20s, and they really gave me hope for the future of our country, because they are super great guys, badass fishermen, hard workers, organized, thoughtful. Yeah, man, I really had a great trip with those guys to Ragged, and we made this little movie. And then, I wrote an article, and then we book a bunch of people, and then COVID hits, right?
Right.
So we have to cancel all that 2020 spring. But luckily, the Bahamas just doesn't mess around. They're going to stay open. 94% of Bahamian GDP comes from tourism. They're going to be open forever. It's never going to close again, as far as I'm concerned. And so last spring we ran 10 groups through. We're only doing 4 people a week, though, so it's real intimate, small deal. But I mean, we immediately, the very first group, everyone in the first group catches a 10-pound plus bonefish.
Jesus, where can you do that?
And we're seeing permit everywhere.
Wow.
And getting them to bite, not landing, but getting a few to bite. And we ran the whole thing. The third week of the season, we had a real experienced fisherman, Jim, he's fished all over the Bahamas, a lot. He caught one that was right around 13.5-pound bonefish, and one that was just under 15 pounds. And I don't know, man, those are whale bonefish. And that 15 pounder or 14. So let's say a 14.5-pounder was in a group of 3, and it was the smallest one.
That's insane.
Yeah, so it's partially from what I can glean from people like Bjorn at Bonefish on the Brain and different people. It has to do with the fact that there's a lot of deep water there. The flats aren't huge, and it's not like going to Belize or Mexico where there's a school of 10,000 2-pounders or 1-pounders. We're seeing, when it was really good in March and April, we were seeing schools out of Davie Bay of 50 fish, but they're all 6 to 10 pounds. Right? And they'll bite. And, really spectacular. I don't know. The difference between a 2-pound bonefish and a 10-pound bonefish is a lot.
Right.
And so then we were told that same group with Jim, we've been seeing a lot of permit, and Jim caught one on the flat right by the lodge. But then I had asked Feichel, I said, what about this spot up here? You said there were permit there before. So we drive up there, and it's this area. It's right by the biggest cut between some of the islands. It's about a 2-mile deep cut where there's a bunch of groupers and stuff. Really cool spot, but we stop the motor and start pulling around. There's permit on rays everywhere. We probably saw 25 permit in an hour that day.
Jeez.
It was insane. And so it was maybe the best day in numbers wise, but just super consistent. Every time we go up there in that whole area north of us, there's a lot of permit. And so guys caught some big ones. You know, it's one of the things that like I'm leaving in 25 days to spend 6 weeks to do our fall trips this year. And I mean, I'm going a week early, and just like Kamchatka, when I go a week early, the week early is for one thing really only, and that's guide training. And for us to go out there and really work on our skills, you know, positioning boat, getting everything, you know, right for the clients, getting everybody ready, making sure the boats are ready, but more of like, this is how we do it. This is where we go. This is, you know, the right way to do it. We have a lot of people booked. I have 1 spot left for the spring. I have 5 groups for this fall. We're only going to take 4 people ever.
And that's lostkeylodge.com.
Yep, lostkeylodge.com.
And what was the name of the movie that came out in 2020?
Expectations.
And how about your Kumchaka operation? How do folks find you there?
So everything there is the best of Kamchatka. You know, that has my email, my phone number. People can call me. I think people, you know, one of the biggest issues I'm having with Kamchatka is actually like the email I got last night from a guy out of Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. He says, I take groups of men on high-end hunting and fishing adventures and have a group who would like to go to Kamchatka and fish next summer. What kind of availability do you have in July? Can you tell me about it? Blah, blah, blah. What's it cost? And how long are the trips? The one thing I don't think people realize is I'm not some shill on the phone. I guide. I've pounded nails on every single one of our walkways. I split wood for the guests if they need wood in their cabin. I'm tying their flies on during the day. I'll serve dinner with the cooks at night. I'm not some shill on the phone. I eat it up. I want to be involved. And so what that allows me to do is I know every nook and cranny of our program. So if people want to call me, they can call me. I really encourage people to make a list, call, and to go to Kamchatka with me or my competitors. Listen, there's enough there for all of us. And I think it's a big mistake for people not to go see what really is the last wild rainbow fishery, native wild rainbow fishery, like untouched, like it is. It's just nothing like it.
Well, I was about 7 days away from coming out there with you about a decade ago to film a TV show, and subsequently had to cancel that trip. So I am still trying to figure out when I can come out there and fish with you, Will. I can't wait to see it, man. Appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with me today.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.